Next up, we have the Reverend Canon Sally Bingham. She is the president and founder of Interfaith Power Light. She has brought widespread attention to the link between religious faith and the environment through her work on the Regeneration Project and the Interfaith Power and Light campaign. Sally is lead author of Love God, Heal Earth. In 2012, Sally was awarded the Audubon Society Rachel Carson Award for her environmental leadership. Her talk today is entitled A Religious Response to Global Warming. Please help me welcome Reverend Sally Bingham.
Well, this is wonderful. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for Elizabeth. You must have invited me. And Bob, it's wonderful to be here for my first visit to CIIS. So I'm very happy to be here, and also the folks that provided me with that amazing Indian meal. Delicious and wonderful. Before I get into my remarks, Melissa just reminded me of something. She said that in the 80s, when she wrote a paper about integrated ecology, I think is what she called it, in the 80s and the 90s, we were working on global climate change as a moral issue. Now, I know you all have had this experience, but you've been saying something to someone over and over and over again, and they're just looking at you blankly, and then somebody else comes in and says the same thing, and they go, right. Okay, Melissa, in the Pope's encyclical, it says integral ecology. He has come up with your term. He has also come out to say climate change is a moral issue. Poor people are affected in the worst ways, and people are grasping this that we've been saying for 15 years, and we don't carry the weight of the Pope, but it is amazing to find that these things are starting to surface, and people all around the world are beginning to understand the problem of climate change, which is what we've been working on almost entirely. Our work at the Regeneration Project is really entirely focused on the Interfaith Power and Light campaign, which is, the tagline is, a religious response to global warming. And it was 15 years ago that we made the decision that the changing climate due to human activity is the most challenging moral issue of our time. It's been the center of my work ever since. We've grown from a few congregations here in California to 18,000 congregations around the country and programs in 40 states. Now, I've been learning on this journey every day. I learn something new. The science of climate became clear, really clear, by 97% of the world's climate scientists. That was about 10 years ago when scientists stopped arguing the issue. And the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere were being produced at such a rate that we were warming the climate, and in many cases we were causing these catastrophic events to happen around the world. If you read the newspaper today, and I took this from Al Gore, he said, it's like taking a hike through the book of Revelations. Droughts, floods, fires, disease, crop disruption, and even more severe storms, the likes of which we have never seen before. So I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, are on the same page with us about this issue. And Interfaith Power and Light has spent the last 15 years informing religious leaders and their constituents about climate change and why we believe it's a spiritual and moral issue. We've asked our member congregations to serve as examples to their communities, and we provide the resources for them to do so. Everything from energy audits, financing for rooftop solar, sermon samples, and even a guide on sustainable food practices. We give financial incentives to retrofit, we have contests, and we give awards. And another aspect of our work is doing as much as we can, as much as we are legally allowed, to work with legislation and public policy. And once a year we descend on Washington, D.C. with all our religious leaders and go into the Capitol and lobby our representatives. But every day I am learning something new about this work I'm doing, and starting with finding out about the greenhouse gases and then having clergy preach from the pulpit about the seriousness of this issue, we had some unintended consequences when we began this work. And I mean that, I say that because the mission is about climate change and the religious response. But what we found in this work is that we were bringing diverse and different religions together, and they were sitting around round tables all agreeing on the same thing. And it's been very enlightening. It was not one of our intentions, but to sit at a table with Jews, Muslims, Christians, Baha'is, and Hindus and Jains, and everybody says, we're with you on this. Caring for creation is a mandate of our religion. We learned that the Buddhists believe, and you heard from Linda Cutts, that everything is interconnected and part of a whole, and if you harm one part of it, you hurt the whole thing. The Jains believe in the sacredness of everything, right down to the last little microorgan that's in the soil. Hindus have a theology that protects all life. The Judeo-Christian starts with God put Adam in the garden to till it and to keep it. And it goes on and on with all these different religions. So the first really big lesson that I learned within a couple of years of doing this work with all these religious types is that we can agree that we are the gardeners of the earth. So as we went deeper into the ministry, it became clear that low-income families, people, and communities, very often people of color, both here and in the United States, here in the United States and around the world, were suffering the most from the consequences of climate change. They contributed little and sometimes nothing to the problem, but are already suffering the consequences and very severe effects. It isn't fair, or I could use the word, it's unjust. More importantly, it's immoral to destroy the very stability of a nation to survive. The industrialized nations of the world have developed on the backs of the poorer nations. We've destroyed their water, their air, their reliability for a stable climate in which to grow food, sea rise that's causing entire cultures to disappear. This is unjust and immoral. So as our work progressed and we looked into how we might help this country get off its dependency on fossil fuels, which is what's causing the climate to change, we found that retiring coal plants would be a good first step to cut carbon emissions. But where are the coal plants? And you all probably know the coal plants are nearly always located in poor neighborhoods. The neighbors, the people in that neighborhood who have the highest rates of lung disease, respiratory problems, and premature death. And as a Christian, I am called to love my neighbor, not to pollute my neighbor's air. Now these neighbors are suffering the most. This is the climate injustice part. This is the environmental injustice part. We need to stand up for those people who have serious problems, and they very often don't have the power to raise their voices because they have concerns that are much more, that are really closer to their hearts at the time. Climate change sounds like something far off in the future, and very often these folks want their children to get home from school without being shot. They want food on the table, and they don't have the time, the energy, or the funds to speak up about what's happening to their air. So that's where the religious community can step in and help. Those are the first victims of climate change and victims of polluted air. So this, again, emphasizes the need for justice. And once again, if you love your neighbor, you don't pollute your neighbor's air. So as we move into the next phase of Interfaith Power and Light, environmental justice is going to be a priority. We have found many areas to work in. We have 4 tree planting projects in the developing world where we are helping communities to reforest because deforestation has happened all over Africa. And here in the US, we're helping to retire coal plants. Right here in Oakland, there's a proposed coal export. You may know about this. A developer wants to bring a coal train from Utah to Oakland, right through the poorest part of Oakland, and export coal out to China. And we're fighting very hard to stop that. And I learned in Arizona last week that every year a few people die from heat exposure, the farmers who are out picking during the summer months. It's gotten so hot there that it isn't a few people dying anymore, it's a great many of them. And there's some folks in Arizona who want to build solar arrays and grow the crops underneath the solar arrays so that these folks can work in the shade. It's probably something, I mean, I hadn't really thought about that, but they're asking that congregational parking lots be torn up and vegetables and crops planted there, and people can work in the shade to harvest their crops. So I will summarize by saying that climate change is a moral issue, and we have a responsibility to respond with love, with care for the poor among us, and the religious community has an extra responsibility because we're the voice that brings moral authority to any conversation, and we can make the change happen that we all need to see happen. The big environmental groups are doing very good work, and we wouldn't have the almost entirely clean air. We wouldn't have, they've done so much good work for us that we have to applaud the big environmental groups. But they often don't work on the equity part. And that's where the religious community has a really important role. We can engage communities at a local level around their congregations and show the connection between housing and jobs and pollution. And if every congregation in the U.S. got involved with climate justice, or even just justice, we could solve this problem. And I think we will. I think the religious community is involved in the issue now in such a big way that we're going to make a difference. I'm going to add on, I'm not seeing any signs up, so oh, I have a minute more.
No, sorry, 3.
I'm not going to take all of that because I'm someone who really would like to give you information, if I have it, that you're interested in and not just talk at you, so I'm going to leave a little extra time for questions afterwards. But I will say that when I was in Paris for the UN climate meeting in December, John Kerry had a small meeting of about 8 people, and I was fortunate to be representing the faith community in America. I mean, astonishing. But he looked at me and said, what is the faith community after? And I said, we're after, we want to have the Green Climate Fund funded, and that's millions and millions of dollars coming from nations around the world that poor nations can draw on for mitigation and adaptation. And I do believe that that is the justice part of this work, where the religious community can really make a difference and stand up for those folks that often don't have the ability to stand up for themselves. Thank you.